The blood-red sun dipped below the horizon as Theresa Turner's swollen eye made it difficult to see the dirt path ahead. Her desperate steps carrying her away from the place she once called home, a place that had become her prison in Quartz Hill, California. 1871. The distant sound of hoof beats sent her heart racing, either her husband coming to drag her back or a stranger who might bring more danger. But she had nowhere to hide on the open trail as darkness descended on the desert landscape. Theresa's hands trembled as she touched the fresh bruises forming on her face. Vernon had been particularly brutal tonight. All because Mr. Peterson, the elderly shopkeeper, had smiled at her and commented on how well she looked in her new bonnet. Such an innocent exchange, but in Vernon's twisted mind, it was evidence of betrayal. "You shame me," Vernon had spat, his breath hot with whiskey as he cornered her in their kitchen. "Flirting with men right under my nose. What kind of wife does that make you?" She tried to explain, to reason with him, but words never mattered when Vernon was in this state. The first blow came quick, the second harder, until she'd fallen to the floor, curling into herself as he continued his assault. When he'd finally stormed out to return to the saloon, she knew she couldn't stay another night. 5 years of marriage had taught her that his rage only intensified with time. So she'd grabbed what little she could carry and fled into the evening, with no destination in mind except away. The sound of approaching hooves grew louder. Theresa stumbled off the path, her skirts catching on scrub brush as she tried to conceal herself behind a large boulder. Pain shot through her ribs with every breath, a reminder of Vernon's boot finding its mark. "Hello there. Anyone on the trail?" A deep voice called out. Theresa pressed herself against the cool stone, willing herself to disappear. "I saw someone heading this way," the voice continued. "If you're in trouble, I can help." She remained silent, tears streaming down her face. "Madam, I don't mean to frighten you, but it's not safe out here after dark. Coyotes get bold, and there's been bandits in these parts." The horse snorted and stamped, seemingly just feet from her hiding place. "I'm just passing through to my ranch south of town. Name's Hank Vance. I can offer you a safe place for the night if you need it." Something in his tone, a gentleness that seemed genuine, made Theresa peek out from behind the rock. The man atop the chestnut stallion was silhouetted against the darkening sky, his broad shoulders topped by a wide-brimmed hat. He carried a rifle across his saddle, but it remained holstered. Theresa's voice cracked. "I have nowhere to go." Hank dismounted slowly, keeping his distance as if approaching a spooked deer. When he got close enough to see her face in the fading light, his expression hardened. "Who did this to you?" he asked quietly. Theresa lowered her eyes. "My husband. I can't go back." Hank stood silent for a moment, then nodded once. "You don't have to." He extended his hand. "My sister lives at my ranch. You can stay with us until you figure out your next steps." Theresa hesitated. Vernon had warned her about men's false kindness, how they all wanted something in return. But the alternative was a night alone in the wilderness or returning to Vernon's fists. "Why would you help a stranger?" she asked. "Because my mother taught me that's what decent folk do," Hank answered simply. "And because whoever did this to you deserves to answer for it." After a moment's consideration, Theresa took his offered hand and allowed him to help her onto the horse. As they rode south in silence, she wondered if she'd made the right choice or merely traded one danger for another. The Vance ranch appeared as a collection of warm, glowing windows in the distance after an hour's ride. It wasn't grand, but it was neat and well-maintained. A main house, barn, and bunkhouse spread across a valley with mountains rising in the background. As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, lantern in hand. She was tall and lean, with her dark hair pulled back in a practical braid. "Hank, that you?" "You're late for supper," she called out. "Got company, Mary," Hank replied, helping Theresa down from the horse. "This lady needs a place to stay tonight." Mary held the lantern higher, gasping softly when she saw Theresa's face. Without a word, she handed the lantern to her brother and gently took Theresa's arm. "Come inside," she said, her voice kind but firm. "Let's get you cleaned up and fed." The interior of the ranch house was simple but comfortable, with a large hearth providing both warmth and light to the main room. Mary led Theresa to a chair by the fire, then busied herself heating water and gathering supplies. "I'm Mary Vance," she said, handing Theresa a cup of hot tea. "My brother and I run this ranch together." "Theresa Turner," she replied, wrapping her trembling hands around the warm cup. I don't want to be a burden." Mary's eyes were gentle but assessing as she took in Theresa's injuries. "Helping someone in need is never a burden. Was it your husband?" Theresa nodded, unable to meet Mary's gaze. "You're safe here," Mary assured her. "Hank may look intimidating, but he's got a good heart. No one will hurt you while you're under our roof." "Vernon will come looking for me," Theresa whispered. "He doesn't like to be defied." "Let him come," Hank said from the doorway. He'd removed his hat and gun belt, looking less imposing but no less capable. "This is our land. He's not welcome on it." For the first time in years, Theresa felt a small flicker of hope. Perhaps here, miles from Vernon's reach, she could catch her breath and figure out how to start over. Mary tended to Theresa's wounds with gentle efficiency, applying witch hazel to the bruises and bandaging a cut on her arm. After a simple but hearty meal of venison stew, she showed Theresa to a small bedroom off the main hall. "It's not much," Mary apologized, "but the bed's clean, and you can lock the door if it helps you feel safer." Exhaustion overwhelmed Theresa as she sank onto the edge of the bed. "I don't know how to thank you both." "Rest now," Mary said. "Tomorrow is soon enough to figure things out." Alone in the borrowed room, Theresa stared at the door lock for a long moment before turning it. The simple click represented a choice she hadn't been allowed to make in years, the choice to keep someone out. She lay down fully clothed, expecting sleep to elude her in this strange place, but exhaustion claimed her almost immediately. She dreamed of Vernon finding her, his face contorted with rage as he dragged her back to their house in town. But when she woke with a start, sunlight was streaming through the small window, and the sounds of ranch life, livestock, voices, the clang of metal drifted in from outside. A dress was laid across the foot of her bed, along with a basin of fresh water and a clean cloth. Theresa washed and changed gratefully, noting that while the dress was plain, it was well made and only slightly large on her frame. When she emerged from the bedroom, Mary was kneading dough at the kitchen table. "Good morning," she greeted. "I hope you slept well. That's one of my dresses, not fancy, but it should do until we can get your things." "My things aren't worth going back for," Theresa said quietly. "And I don't think I should stay. Vernon has a temper, and I don't want to bring trouble to your door." Mary continued kneading, her strong hands working the dough with practiced motions. "Trouble comes whether we invite it or not. The question is whether we face it alone or together." Before Theresa could respond, the door opened and Hank entered, his shirt damp with sweat from morning chores. He stopped short when he saw Theresa, removing his hat. "Madam," he nodded politely, "how are you feeling today?" In the daylight, Theresa got her first clear look at the man who'd rescued her. Hank Vance was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin that spoke of years working outdoors. His eyes were a warm brown, direct but not unkind, and a scar ran along his jawline, partially hidden by stubble. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way Vernon had been when they'd first met, but there was something solid and reassuring about his presence. "Better, thank you," she replied, self-consciously touching her bruised face. "Mr. Vance, I appreciate your kindness, but I should move on. I don't want to impose." "Where will you go?" he asked simply. The question hung in the air. Theresa had no family in California, no friends close enough to risk harboring a runaway wife and precious little money of her own. I don't know," she admitted. Hank exchanged a glance with his sister before addressing Theresa again. "We need help around here. Mary's been running herself ragged managing the house and the accounts. If you'd be willing to help with cooking and household matters, you'd be earning your keep." "It would be a relief," Mary added. "I'm not much for domestic tasks, truth be told." Theresa hesitated. The offer was tempting, a safe place, honest work, but Vernon's threats echoed in her mind. He'd promised if she ever left, he'd find her, and God help anyone who helped her. "I should tell you," she began carefully. "My husband, Vernon Turner, is not a man who forgives easily. He's well respected in Quartz Hill, owns the largest saloon in town, and has friends in the sheriff's office. If he discovers I'm here—" "I'm familiar with Turner," Hank said, his expression darkening. "His reputation precedes him. But this is my land, and I decide who stays on it. You're welcome here as long as you need." Something in his tone suggested there was history between the men, but Theresa didn't press. Instead, she nodded slowly. "Then I accept your offer, at least for now. I'm a good cook and I can sew." "Good," Mary smiled, returning to her dough. "First order of business after breakfast is to show you around so you know where everything is." Over the next 2 weeks, Theresa settled into life at the Vance ranch. The work was hard but satisfying, so different from her life in town, where Vernon controlled her every movement and interaction. Here, she cooked for the ranch hands, mended clothes, and helped Mary with the accounts, discovering she had a head for numbers that Mary appreciated. Hank kept a respectful distance, never entering a room where Theresa was alone, always announcing his presence before coming into the house. But she often felt his eyes on her when she worked in the garden or hung laundry, not in the possessive way Vernon had watched her, but with a quiet concern that made her both uncomfortable and oddly comforted. One evening, as she sat on the porch shelling peas, Hank joined her, taking a seat on the steps with enough distance between them to avoid impropriety. "Mary says you've been a godsend," he commented, rolling a cigarette between his fingers. "She's actually had time to work with the horses instead of being stuck inside all day." "I enjoy the work," Theresa replied. "It feels good to be useful." "You were never useless," Hank said quietly. "No one deserves to be treated the way Turner treated you." Theresa's hand stilled. "How do you know Vernon?" Hank struck a match, the brief flare illuminating his face in the gathering dusk. "Our paths crossed a few years back. There was a dispute over water rights. He wanted to divert the creek that runs through my property to supply his new bathhouse in town. When I refused, he tried other methods of persuasion. What happened? Let's just say he discovered I'm not easily intimidated." Hank exhaled a stream of smoke. "But a man like that doesn't forget being defied. He's been looking for ways to cause trouble for me ever since." Theresa felt a chill despite the warm evening. "Then I've brought his hatred to your doorstep twice over." "You didn't bring anything except hard work and Mary's smile," Hank countered. "My sister hasn't been this content since before our parents passed." "Whatever comes, it was worth it for that alone." They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell, the only sounds the chirp of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. "You miss town?" Hank asked eventually. Theresa considered the question. "I miss certain things, talking with Mrs. Abernathy at the general store, the library, small as it was, Sunday services." She sighed. "But those pleasures came with a price. Vernon didn't like me speaking to anyone, especially men. Even innocent conversations would send him into a rage. "That's no way to live," Hank said, his voice low and angry. "No," she agreed, "it isn't. I just didn't see a way out until that night." Hank rose, crushing his cigarette beneath his boot. "There's always a way out, Mrs. Turner. Sometimes we just need help finding it." He tipped his hat. "Good night." "Good night, Mr. Vance," she replied, watching his tall figure disappear into the darkness. The peaceful routine was shattered 3 days later when one of the ranch hands, a young man named Tommy, came galloping up to the house, his horse lathered with exertion. "Mr. Vance," he called, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. "Riders coming. 5 men, and one of them matches the description of that Turner fellow from town." Theresa, who had been hanging linens on the line, felt her blood run cold. Hank emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "How far out?" he asked Tommy, his voice calm despite the news. "About 15 minutes, I reckon. They're moving at a steady pace, not rushing like they don't want to announce themselves." Hank nodded. "Go tell the boys to keep working but have their rifles handy. No need to look like we're expecting trouble, but be ready for it." As Tommy hurried to obey, Hank turned to Theresa. "Go inside and stay with Mary. Lock the doors." "I should leave," Theresa said, panic rising in her throat. "If I'm not here, maybe he'll go peacefully." "And maybe he'll burn down the ranch out of spite," Hank countered. "We face this together like we agreed." Before she could argue further, Mary appeared on the porch, rifle in hand. "Theresa, come inside. Hank knows what he's doing." Reluctantly, Theresa followed Mary into the house, pausing at the door to look back at Hank. He stood tall in the yard, seemingly relaxed but alert, like a mountain lion sensing intrusion into its territory. Through the window, Theresa watched as the riders appeared on the horizon, a dust cloud announcing their approach. Vernon led the group, his gray horse distinctive even at a distance. Beside him rode Sheriff Mills, a man who frequented Vernon's saloon and turned a blind eye to the bruises Vernon left on his wife. The other 3 men Theresa recognized as regular patrons of the saloon, men who owed Vernon money or favors. "He's brought the law," Theresa whispered to Mary, who stood beside her at the window, rifle at the ready. "Mills isn't the law," Mary replied grimly. "He's just a man with a badge and a weakness for free whiskey." The riders slowed as they approached the ranch house, forming a loose semicircle facing Hank. Vernon dismounted first, his movements betraying his agitation despite his attempt at casual authority. "Vance," he called, loud enough for the women to hear through the window. "Nice spread you have here. Seems to be doing well." "Turner," Hank acknowledged with a nod. "What brings you and the sheriff to my property?" Vernon's false smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm looking for my wife. She wandered off a few weeks back, not in her right mind. I've been worried sick." "Is that so?" Hank's tone remained neutral, but his stance shifted subtly, ready for trouble. "Indeed," Vernon continued. "Poor thing's been having spells, imagining things, making wild accusations. Doctor says it's female hysteria. I just want to get her the help she needs." Theresa's hands clenched into fists at the lies. Vernon had used this tactic before, convincing others that her injuries were self-inflicted during episodes. Sheriff Mills cleared his throat. "We've had reports she might be in these parts, Vance. As an officer of the law, I'm asking if you've seen Theresa Turner. And as a property owner, I'm curious what evidence brings you to my specific doorstep," Hank countered. Vernon's fake smile slipped. "Don't play games, Vance. One of my men saw you riding with a woman matching Theresa's description 2 weeks ago. We both know she's here." "Do we?" Hank crossed his arms. "Seems to me if a woman ran from her husband in the night, she had good reason." Vernon's face darkened. "My wife's affairs are none of your concern." Either produce her now, or we'll search the property ourselves." "You're not searching anything without a warrant," Hank said, his voice hardening. "And even if you had one, I'd advise against trying to force your way onto my land." As if on cue, several ranch hands appeared from various directions, each carrying a rifle and positioning themselves strategically around the yard. Sheriff Mills shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Now, let's all calm down. No need for this to get ugly." Vernon ignored him, his attention fixed on Hank. "I know she's here, Vance, and I know what game you're playing. You've wanted to stick it to me ever since that water dispute, but she's my wife, my property by law, and you're harboring her illegally." "A woman isn't property, Turner," Hank replied, his tone dangerous. "And any man who thinks she is doesn't deserve to call himself a husband." Vernon's hand moved toward his holster, but Sheriff Mills grabbed his arm. "Easy now," the sheriff cautioned. "This isn't the way." Inside, Theresa trembled with fear and anger. "I should go out there. I can't let this escalate because of me." "That's exactly what he wants," Mary hissed, gripping Theresa's arm. "For you to feel so guilty you surrender yourself. Hank can handle this." Outside, the tension crackled like lightning before a storm. Vernon shook off the sheriff's restraining hand. "You've made an enemy today, Vance," he spat. "This isn't over." "On that we agree," Hank replied steadily. "It won't be over until you understand that you don't own Theresa Turner, and you never did." Vernon's eyes narrowed. "So she is here." "I didn't say that," Hank countered. "I said you don't own her. Whether she's here or in Mexico or halfway to New York is irrelevant to that fact." For a tense moment, it seemed Vernon might ignore the odds and start shooting. But after a long, hate-filled glare, he turned and remounted his horse. "We'll be back with a warrant," he promised. "And next time I won't be so civil." Sheriff Mills looked relieved at the de-escalation. "Best head back to town before dark," he muttered, tipping his hat awkwardly to Hank before turning his horse. The group rode away, Vernon repeatedly looking back over his shoulder, his posture rigid with barely contained rage. Only after they disappeared from sight did Hank signal the ranch hands to stand down and come inside. His face was grim as he entered the house. "They'll be back," he said without preamble. "Turner's not a man to let things go." Theresa sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "I've brought this on you. I should never have stayed." "Stop that talk," Mary said firmly, putting away her rifle. "We knew what we were doing when we took you in." Hank paced the room, thinking. Turner has influence, but not enough to get a legitimate warrant. Still, Mills might give him one anyway to keep the peace. "What do we do?" Theresa asked, fear constricting her throat. Hank stopped pacing, his decision made. "We need to get you to safety, away from California. I have friends in Colorado who could help you start fresh." The prospect of leaving sent a pang through Theresa's heart that surprised her. In just a few short weeks, the ranch had begun to feel like home in a way her house in town never had. "Colorado," she repeated faintly. "It's a good plan," Mary said, though her expression betrayed her sadness at the thought of Theresa leaving. "Vernon wouldn't follow you that far." Hank knelt before Theresa's chair, meeting her eyes directly. "I promised you'd be safe here, and I aim to keep that promise. Sometimes that means knowing when to stand your ground and when to find new ground to stand on." Looking into his earnest face, Theresa realized how much she'd come to trust this man who asked for nothing in return for his protection. The thought of leaving him them, she corrected herself mentally, left an unexpected hollowness in her chest. "When would I need to go?" she asked. "Tomorrow," Hank replied, "before Turner can return with that warrant, legitimate or otherwise." Theresa nodded slowly, resignation settling over her. Just when she'd found a place where she felt valued and safe, she would have to leave it behind. That evening, as she packed the few belongings she'd accumulated during her stay, a dress Mary had given her, a hairbrush, a small book of poetry Hank had lent her, Theresa fought back tears. She'd known this sanctuary couldn't last forever, but the reality of leaving struck her harder than expected. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Mary entered, carrying a small bundle. "Some provisions for your journey," she explained, setting the bundle on the bed. "And this." She pressed a small pouch into Theresa's hand. "It's not much, but it should help you get established." Theresa opened the pouch to find several gold coins. "Mary, I can't accept this." "You can and you will," Mary insisted. "You've more than earned it with your work here. Besides, Hank would have given you twice as much if I'd let him." The mention of Hank brought a flush to Theresa's cheeks. "He's been very kind." Mary gave her a knowing look. "He's been more than kind. I haven't seen my brother look at anyone the way he looks at you since Elizabeth died." "Elizabeth?" Theresa couldn't hide her surprise. "His wife," Mary explained. "She passed during a fever outbreak 5 years ago. Hank blamed himself for not getting the doctor in time, though nothing could have saved her. He's kept to himself since then, focused on the ranch until you arrived." This new information about Hank that he had loved and lost so deeply added another dimension to the quiet strength she'd observed in him. "I didn't know," she murmured. "He doesn't speak of it," Mary said, "but I thought you should know before you leave. Whatever happens tomorrow, you've brought something back to life in my brother. For that alone, I'm grateful you found your way to us." After Mary left, Theresa sat on the edge of the bed, turning the pouch of coins over in her hands. The thought of starting over in Colorado alone filled her with dread. But what alternative did she have? Vernon would never stop hunting her as long as she remained within his reach. Sleep eluded her that night, her mind racing with fears about the journey ahead and regrets about the connections she would leave behind. When dawn broke, she rose wearily, dressing in the practical traveling clothes Mary had provided. The household was already awake, the atmosphere solemn as Mary prepared a hearty breakfast no one seemed interested in eating. Hank entered from outside, his expression unreadable. "The wagon's ready," he announced. "We should leave within the hour if we want to catch the eastbound train at Junction City." Theresa looked up sharply. I'm taking you to Colorado myself," Hank explained. "Mary will manage things here until I return." "But that's a journey of weeks," Theresa protested. "I can't ask you to do that." "You didn't ask," Hank said simply. "I'm offering. Turner is dangerous and I won't send you off alone to face that danger." Mary nodded in agreement. "It's the right decision. I've got Campbell and the boys to help me here. We'll be fine." Theresa looked between the siblings, overwhelmed by their continued willingness to disrupt their lives for her safety. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Say you'll eat some breakfast before we head out," Hank suggested with a small smile. "It's a long road to Junction City." An hour later, with her few possessions loaded onto the wagon and tearful goodbyes said to Mary, Theresa sat beside Hank as they pulled away from the ranch. The morning was clear and cool, the landscape stretching out before them painted in the soft colors of early autumn. "Thank you," she said quietly as the ranch disappeared behind them, "for everything." Hank kept his eyes on the road ahead, but his voice was gentle. "Sometimes the right thing and the hard thing are the same thing." They traveled in companionable silence for several miles, the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves and the creak of wagon wheels creating a soothing background to Theresa's tumultuous thoughts. "Tell me about Colorado," she finally said, needing distraction from her worries. "Beautiful country," Hank replied. "Mountains higher than you can imagine, forests thick with pine, rivers full of trout. My friend Thomas runs a trading post near a growing settlement. Good folks there, building something new." It's the kind of place where a person's past doesn't matter as much as what they bring to the community. It sounds wonderful, Theresa said, trying to imagine this new land. It can be, Hank agreed. Hard winters, though, but the people look out for each other. He glanced at her. You'll fit in well there. The words were encouraging, but Theresa caught a note of regret in his voice that mirrored her own feelings. They continued their journey through the day, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried apples. As afternoon faded toward evening, Hank became increasingly alert, repeatedly checking the road behind them. Is something wrong? Theresa asked, noticing his tension. Probably nothing, he replied, though his hand rested near his holstered revolver. Just being cautious. They made camp as darkness fell, finding a sheltered spot beside a small stream. Hank efficiently set up a simple camp, building a small fire and preparing a pot of coffee and beans. He laid out a bedroll for Theresa some distance from his own, maintaining propriety even in these unusual circumstances. As they sat by the fire, eating their simple meal, Theresa studied Hank's profile in the flickering light. The strong line of his jaw, the thoughtful set of his eyes, the way his hands, large and work-roughened, moved with surprising gentleness as he tended the fire. "Mary told me about your wife," she said softly. "I'm sorry for your loss." Hank stilled for a moment before carefully setting down his coffee cup. Elizabeth was a good woman. She deserved better than dying young in a place half-built. "I'm sure you gave her a good life, however brief." He shook his head. "I was so focused on building the ranch, making it successful. I should have been focused on her." His eyes reflected the dancing flames. "That's my regret, that I didn't recognize what mattered most until it was gone." Theresa recognized the weight of guilt in his words, a burden he'd carried for years. "We all have regrets," she said. "Things we do differently if given another chance." Hank looked at her directly then. "What would you do differently?" The question caught her off guard. She hesitated, considering. "I would have trusted myself more. When I first met Vernon, there were signs of his true nature, but I ignored them. I was young and flattered by his attention. By the time I recognized the danger, I was already trapped." "You're not trapped anymore," Hank reminded her gently. "No," she agreed, a small smile forming. "Thanks to you." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and feelings neither was ready to acknowledge. Finally, Hank cleared his throat and stood. "We should rest. Early start tomorrow if we want to reach Junction City by nightfall." Theresa nodded, retreating to her bedroll. Despite the hard ground and unfamiliar surroundings, she fell into an exhausted sleep, only to be jolted awake by Hank's hand over her mouth. "Quiet," he whispered, his face close to hers in the darkness. "Riders approaching. Stay here and keep low." He moved away silently, taking his rifle and disappearing into the surrounding brush. Theresa's heart hammered in her chest as she strained to hear what had alerted him. Then she caught at the distant sound of horses moving at a walk, trying to be quiet. She slipped from her bedroll and crouched behind a large rock, peering into the darkness. The fire had burned down to embers, providing just enough light to make out shapes but not details. 3 horsemen emerged from the trees on the far side of the clearing, their approach cautious. Theresa recognized Vernon's silhouette immediately, his distinctive hat visible even in the dim light. The other 2 were likely saloon men, not the sheriff. This was not an official pursuit. "I know you're out here, Vance," Vernon called, his voice carrying in the night air. "You left a trail a blind man could follow. Give me my wife, and maybe I'll let you ride away from this." Silence answered him. Theresa pressed herself closer to the rock, fear and anger warring within her. "Theresa," Vernon's voice changed, becoming cajoling. "Darling, I know you're scared. Whatever lies Vance has told you, I forgive you. Come home where you belong." The false kindness in his tone made her stomach turn. She'd heard this voice before, the repentant husband promising change, only to revert to violence once she was back under his control. "Last chance, Vance," Vernon called, his patience visibly wearing thin. "Show yourself, or we start shooting into those trees." A shot rang out, startling both Theresa and the intruders. It hadn't hit anyone. It was a warning, fired from somewhere to the left of the camp. "That's close enough, Turner," Hank's voice came from the darkness. "Turn around and ride out the way you came." Vernon and his men swiveled toward the sound, guns drawn. "3 against 1, Vance. Poor odds for you." "Better check your math," came a new voice from behind them. A tall figure emerged from the trees, rifle raised. "Seems even to me." It was Campbell, the foreman from the Vance ranch. How he'd found them or known they needed help, Theresa couldn't guess, but relief flooded through her at the sight of him. Vernon cursed, caught between 2 armed men. "This isn't your fight, Campbell." "Mr. Vance's fights are ranch fights," Campbell replied steadily. "That's how we do things." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring, each man calculating his odds. Theresa held her breath, knowing that any sudden movement could trigger bloodshed. Finally, Vernon lowered his gun slightly. "This isn't over, Vance. That woman is my wife by law. The courts will see it my way." "The courts might interest themselves in how you treat your wife," Hank replied, emerging partially from cover but keeping his rifle trained on Vernon. "Especially with witnesses willing to testify." Vernon's face contorted with rage. "You think anyone will take a woman's word over mine? I own half the businesses in Quartz Hill." "And I have friends in the territorial governor's office," Hank countered. "Shall we see whose influence reaches further?" Uncertainty flickered across Vernon's face for the first time. He glanced at his companions, who looked increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. "Vernon," one of them muttered, "maybe we should head back. Sheriff's gonna wonder where we went." After a tense moment, Vernon holstered his gun with deliberate slowness. "This isn't finished, Vance. A man has rights to his wife." "A woman has rights to her safety," Hank replied. "Remember that the next time you think about following us." With a final venomous glare, Vernon wheeled his horse around. "Let's go, boys. We know where they're headed now anyway." As the 3 riders disappeared into the night, Theresa emerged shakily from her hiding place. Hank immediately moved to her side, checking her for injury though she'd been nowhere near the confrontation. "Are you all right?" he asked, his hands gentle on her shoulders. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Campbell approached, lowering his rifle. "Mary sent me after you," he explained to Hank. "Turner came back to the ranch looking for you both, making threats. She thought you might need backup." "Good thinking," Hank acknowledged. "Thank you." "What now?" Theresa asked, finding her voice at last. "Vernon knows we're headed east. He'll follow us to Junction City." Hank's expression was grim but determined. "Then we don't go to Junction City. We'll head north instead, catch the train at a different station." He turned to Campbell. "Ride back and tell Mary we're changing plans. We'll head to Sacramento, then east from there." Campbell nodded. "Will do, boss. Want me to stay with you until morning?" Hank considered the offer, then shook his head. "Better get back to the ranch. I don't trust Turner not to cause trouble there while I'm gone." After Campbell departed, Hank quickly broke camp, loading their belongings into the wagon. "We should move on," he explained. "Find a new place to rest for what's left of the night. I don't like how easily they found us here." As they traveled through the darkness, the moon providing just enough light to follow the trail, Theresa's mind raced with the implications of the night's events. "He's never going to stop, is he?" she said finally. Hank's profile was resolute in the moonlight. "Men like Turner only understand one thing, that they can't always win. Once he realizes that, he'll move on. You don't know him like I do, Theresa replied quietly. His pride won't let him walk away. Then we make sure he has no choice, Hank said with quiet intensity. I promised you'd be safe, Theresa. I intend to keep that promise. The use of her given name, rare from his lips, warmed something inside her despite the night's chill. They traveled until dawn broke, finally stopping at a small homestead owned by friends of Hank's, who offered them breakfast and a place to rest for a few hours. By midday, they were on the road again, now headed northwest toward Sacramento. The detour would add days to their journey, but it offered the best chance of losing Vernon's pursuit. As they traveled, Theresa found herself studying Hank with new eyes. His willingness to upend his own plans, to face danger on her behalf, spoke of a character far different from any man she'd known. Where Vernon demanded control, Hank offered choice. Where Vernon saw her as possession, Hank treated her as a person worthy of respect. On the third day of their journey, as they made camp beside a clear running stream, Theresa finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "Why are you doing all this for me?" she asked as they sat beside the campfire. "Truly, it's far beyond simple kindness to a stranger." Hank was quiet for a long moment, poking at the fire with a stick. "When Elizabeth died," he said finally, "I was lost in grief and guilt. I threw myself into the ranch, worked from dawn till dusk, barely spoke to anyone, even Mary. I was existing, not living." He looked up, meeting her eyes across the flames. "The night I found you on the trail, something changed. Here was someone who needed help I could actually provide. It reminded me there was more to life than just surviving each day. So I was a project, a way to ease your conscience." The words came out harsher than she intended. "No," Hank shook his head firmly. "You were a reminder that I was still capable of caring about someone beyond myself and Mary. And the more I've come to know you, your strength, your kindness, despite all you've endured, the more I've realized that helping you wasn't just about doing the right thing. It was about recognizing something rare and valuable that deserved to be protected." The rawness of his admission left Theresa speechless. In all her years with Vernon, he'd never once spoken to her with such honest vulnerability. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't need to say anything," Hank assured her. "I'm not expecting anything in return. I just wanted you to understand that this journey, challenging as it is, has meant something important to me." They fell silent, the crackling fire and chorus of night insects filling the space between them. Theresa felt a shift in her heart, a tentative opening toward possibilities she'd long since abandoned. The next morning, they continued their journey, the conversation of the previous night creating a new awareness between them. Theresa found herself noticing small things: the way Hank's eyes crinkled when he smiled, how he always checked her comfort before his own, the gentle way he handled the horses. As they approached Sacramento 2 days later, Hank became increasingly vigilant, watching for any sign they were being followed. They entered the bustling city cautiously, heading directly to the train station to purchase tickets for the eastbound train departing the following morning. "We'll stay at a hotel tonight," Hank decided as they left the station. "Safer than camping, and we could both use a proper meal and bed." He chose a modest but respectable establishment near the station, securing 2 adjoining rooms with a connecting door they left unlocked for safety. After weeks on the trail, the luxury of a hot bath and clean sheets seemed almost unimaginable to Theresa. That evening, refreshed and wearing a new dress Hank had insisted on purchasing for her, Theresa joined him for dinner in the hotel's small dining room. It felt strange yet wonderful to sit at a proper table, to be served food she hadn't had to cook herself, to engage in conversation without constantly watching over her shoulder for Vernon's approach. "Tomorrow, at this time, we'll be well on our way east," Hank commented as they finished their meal. "Another week to Denver, then a short journey to Silverton where my friend's trading post is located." Theresa nodded, trying to summon enthusiasm for this plan that would take her farther from the only home she'd known and the man across from her who had come to mean so much. "You'll like Thomas and his wife, Sarah," Hank continued. "Good people. They'll help you get settled, find work if you want it. The town's growing, they need teachers, seamstresses, all sorts of skills." "It sounds promising," Theresa said, though her heart wasn't in the words. Hank studied her face, having second thoughts. Not about leaving California, she clarified, or Vernon, just, she hesitated, unsure how to express the conflicted feelings in her heart. "Just," Hank prompted gently. Before she could answer, a commotion at the hotel entrance drew their attention. A group of men had entered, loud and obviously having already visited at least one saloon. Theresa's blood froze as she recognized Vernon's voice among them. "He's here," she whispered, instinctively shrinking in her seat. Hank's expression darkened as he glanced toward the entrance. "Stay calm. We'll go out the kitchen way." He signaled the waiter, discreetly explaining the situation and pressing coins into the man's hand. The waiter nodded understanding and led them through the kitchen to a back door that opened into an alley. As they slipped outside, Theresa could hear Vernon's voice growing louder in the dining room, demanding information about a couple matching their description. "How did he find us?" she asked as they hurried through the darkened alley. "Telegraph, probably," Hank replied grimly. "He must have wired ahead to contacts in Sacramento to watch for us." He took her hand, guiding her through the unfamiliar streets. "We need to get back to the hotel, grab our things, and find somewhere else to stay tonight." They circled around, approaching the hotel from a side entrance and making their way cautiously to their rooms. Hank quickly gathered their belongings while Theresa changed back into her practical traveling clothes. "The train doesn't leave until morning," she said anxiously. "Where will we go?" "I know a place," Hank assured her. "A friend's livery stable not far from here. We can shelter there for the night." They slipped out of the hotel unseen, moving through the city's evening shadows toward the riverfront where the livery was located. The stable was closed for the night, but Hank's friend, roused from his quarters above, quickly ushered them inside when the situation was explained. "You can stay in the loft," he offered. "Not fancy, but warm and dry. I'll keep watch below." "I'm sorry for bringing this trouble to your door," Theresa told the man as they climbed to the hayloft. He waved away her concern. "Any friend of Hank's is a friend of mine. Besides, I've heard of Vernon Turner. Man's got a reputation that extends beyond Quartz Hill." Settled in the hayloft, a lantern providing soft light against the darkness, Theresa and Hank spoke in low voices, planning their next move. "Once we're on the train, we should be safe," Hank reasoned. "Turner can't stop a train, and we'll be watching for him at every station." Theresa nodded, but worry gnawed at her. "What about when you return to California? He'll come after you, Hank. He doesn't forgive those who defy him." "Let him come," Hank said with quiet confidence. "I can handle Vernon Turner." "That's what concerns me," Theresa admitted. "I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me." Hank's expression softened as he looked at her. "Some things are worth the risk, Theresa." The way he said her name, full of warmth and something deeper, made her heart race. In that moment, huddled in a hayloft hiding from her vengeful husband, Theresa realized with startling clarity that she had fallen in love with Hank Vance. The recognition both exhilarated and terrified her. She was still legally bound to Vernon, still running for her freedom. What right did she have to feelings for another man? And yet, The emotion welling inside her felt more honest and true than anything she'd experienced in her marriage. "What are you thinking?" Hank asked, noticing her silence. Theresa hesitated, then spoke from her heart. "I'm thinking that I don't want to go to Colorado." Confusion flickered across his face. "But Vernon, I'm not suggesting we return to Quartz Hill," she clarified. "But perhaps there's somewhere else we could go, together." Understanding dawned in Hank's eyes, followed by a complex mix of hope and uncertainty. "Theresa, you don't owe me anything. I never expected this isn't about owing," she interrupted. "It's about choosing. For the first time in years, I'm making a choice based on what I want, not what I fear." She took a deep breath. "And I want to be where you are, Hank." He moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're still married in the eyes of the law. A marriage built on lies and fear is no true marriage," she countered. "I'll find a way to legally end it however long it takes." "People will talk," he warned, though he was close enough now that she could feel his breath on her face. "Let them," Theresa replied with newfound courage. "I've lived too long worried about what others think." Hank's hand came up to gently cup her cheek. "Are you certain? This won't be an easy road." "The only certainty I have," she whispered, "is that I don't want to lose you." The kiss, when it came, was gentle yet profound, a promise, a beginning, a declaration all at once. Theresa felt something within her heal and strengthen simultaneously, as if pieces of herself long suppressed were finally coming to life. When they parted, Hank rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected to feel this way again," he admitted. "After Elizabeth, I thought that part of me was gone forever. And I never knew it was possible to feel this way at all," Theresa replied. "Vernon's version of love was possession, not partnership." "That's not love," Hank said firmly. "Love is wanting the other person to be free to be fully themselves." He took her hands in his. "I want that for you, Theresa, whether it's with me or not." "It's with you," she assured him, "if you'll have me." His smile was answer enough, but the words that followed sealed her certainty. "I think I've been waiting for you without knowing it. Whatever comes next, we face it together." Morning brought new clarity and new plans. Instead of boarding the eastbound train, they purchased tickets heading north to Oregon Territory. Vernon would be watching the eastbound lines, giving them the chance to disappear in a different direction altogether. As the train pulled away from Sacramento, Theresa felt both trepidation and exhilaration. She was leaving behind not just Vernon, but her entire past life, moving toward an uncertain future with a man she'd known for mere weeks. By conventional standards, it was reckless. By the measure of her heart, it was the first truly right decision she'd made in years. "What will we do in Oregon?" she asked as they watched California slip away through the train window. "Start fresh," Hank replied. "I have some savings, enough to buy land. We could build something new, something ours." "What about Mary, your ranch?" "Mary's wanted to run that ranch herself for years," Hank said with a chuckle. "She'll probably celebrate once she gets over being worried about us, and I'll send for her once we're settled if she wants to join us." The journey north took several days, the landscape changing from California's golden hills to Oregon's dense forests and fertile valleys. They remained vigilant at every stop, watching for any sign of pursuit, but as the miles increased between them and Vernon, Theresa began to breathe more freely. They settled eventually in a growing community near the Willamette Valley, where Hank purchased a modest parcel with good soil and access to water. The locals welcomed them without excessive questions, assuming they were a married couple looking for a fresh start like so many others in the territory. Theresa, conscious of propriety despite her unconventional situation, insisted on maintaining separate dwellings until her marriage to Vernon could be legally dissolved. Hank respected her decision, building a small cabin for her near the larger home he constructed for himself, though they spent most waking hours together working the land. Word reached them through Mary that Vernon had indeed followed the eastbound train, traveling as far as Denver before losing the trail. He'd returned to Quartz Hill in a fury, but his influence was waning as rumors of his treatment of Theresa spread through the community. The sheriff, facing pressure from more respectable citizens, had begun distancing himself from Vernon's business. 6 months after their arrival in Oregon, a letter arrived from a lawyer Hank had engaged in California. The divorce proceedings had begun, citing abandonment and cruelty. It would take time. The law favored husbands in such matters, but with witness testimonies from those who had seen Theresa's injuries, there was hope for eventual freedom. As they stood together reading the letter on the porch of Hank's now completed house, Theresa felt a profound sense of peace despite the legal battles still ahead. "It's really happening," she marveled. "I never thought I'd be free of him." Hank's arm encircled her waist, drawing her close. "You've been free of him since the night you walked away," he reminded her. "The law is just catching up to the truth." Theresa leaned into his embrace, surveying the land they'd begun to transform together. A vegetable garden thrived near her cabin. The first fruit trees had been planted, and the foundation for a barn was taking shape. It was modest compared to the established ranch Hank had left behind, but it was theirs built on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than obligation or possession. "I've been thinking," she said carefully, "about the future, about us." Hank turned to face her fully, his expression open. "What about us? When the divorce is final, I don't want to wait any longer to truly build a life together." She touched his face gently. "I want to be your wife, Hank, not just in the eyes of our neighbors who already assume as much, but in truth." The joy that spread across his features was answer enough, but his words confirmed it. "Nothing would make me happier, Theresa. I've wanted to ask, but I didn't want to rush you." She laughed softly. "After everything we've been through together, waiting seems unnecessary. We know each other's hearts already." "That we do," he agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. The divorce was finalized 14 months after their arrival in Oregon, the legal documents arriving on a bright spring morning. That same afternoon, they rode into town together and were married by the local justice of the peace, with their closest neighbors as witnesses. It was a simple ceremony, but as Theresa spoke her vows to Hank, she felt the profound difference between this marriage and her first. These promises were freely given, not coerced. This union was a partnership of equals, not a transfer of ownership from father to husband. As they returned to their land now truly, their shared home, Theresa reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The night she'd fled Vernon's fists had been the darkest of her life, yet it had set her on a path to happiness she couldn't have imagined. "What are you thinking?" Hank asked as they approached the house, their hands intertwined. "I'm thinking about how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from what's familiar, even when you don't know what's waiting ahead." He nodded, understanding. "And sometimes the kindest thing you can do is offer someone a safe place to land when they take that leap." "You did more than offer safety," Theresa said, her voice filled with emotion. "You showed me what respect feels like, what love should be." Hank's eyes held hers, his expression solemn. "I promise you'll never have reason to fear me, Theresa. You'll always be free to speak your mind, to make your own choices, to be fully yourself." "I know," she replied simply. "That's why I love you." As twilight settled over their homestead, Theresa Vance stood beside her husband, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The path that had brought them together had been marked by danger and uncertainty, but it had led to this moment of profound peace. She thought of the frightened woman who had stumbled along a dirt road 2 years earlier, bruised and desperate, and marveled at the distance she had traveled not just in miles, but in courage and self-discovery. With Hank beside her, she had found not only safety but purpose, not just escape but belonging. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had already faced so much together, as equals, bound by choice rather than obligation. And in that knowledge, Theresa found a joy deeper and more enduring than she had ever dared to hope for. 2 years later, the Vance homestead had grown into a prosperous farm. Apple trees blossomed in neat rows, chickens scratched in the yard, and a small herd of dairy cows grazed in the green pasture. The original small cabin where Theresa had first lived now served as a guest house, occasionally housing Mary when she visited from California. The main house had expanded with the addition of a nursery, built by Hank's own hands in anticipation of their first child. As Theresa stood at the window, her hand resting on her growing belly, she watched Hank working in the barn with their hired hand, a young man they'd taken in after finding him hungry and homeless on the road to town. Giving opportunities to those in need had become something of a mission for them both. Their home had become known in the community as a place where those facing hardship could find temporary shelter and honest work. It was Theresa's way of honoring the chance she'd been given when she was at her most vulnerable. A letter had arrived that morning from Mary, bringing news from Quartz Hill. Vernon Turner had finally sold his saloon and left town after his business declined steadily in the wake of growing rumors about his treatment of his former wife. No one knew where he'd gone, and frankly, no one much cared. The news brought Theresa a final sense of closure. Vernon no longer cast a shadow over her life, not even from a distance. She was free to look forward without glancing back. As if sensing her thoughts, Hank appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Everything all right? You've been standing there a while." Theresa smiled, holding out the letter. Mary wrote, "Vernon's gone from Quartz Hill." Hank read the news, then looked up at his wife. "How do you feel about that?" "Relieved," she admitted. "Not for myself, I've been free of him for years now. But relieved that others won't suffer from his presence." Hank nodded understanding, setting the letter aside and moving to stand behind her, his hands gently cradling her rounded belly. "You've come a long way from that night on the trail." "We both have," she replied, leaning back against his solid warmth. "I never imagined life could be this peaceful, this equal." "That's what marriage should be," Hank said simply. "Two people facing the world side by side, supporting each other through whatever comes." The baby kicked beneath their joined hands, a strong movement that made them both laugh softly. "This little one's going to have a different kind of life," Theresa mused. "Growing up seeing a mother who speaks her mind, who isn't afraid, who talks to whoever she pleases." "And a father who listens," Hank added, "who values your voice as much as his own." Theresa turned in his embrace to face him, her expression suddenly serious. "Promise me something." "Anything," he replied without hesitation. "Promise me we'll always remember to talk to each other, even when it's difficult, that we'll never let silence build walls between us." Hank's eyes held hers, understanding the roots of her request in the painful isolation of her first marriage. "I promise." "Your voice is one of the things I love most about you, your thoughts, your ideas, your laughter. I never want to miss a word." The simple sincerity of his response brought tears to her eyes. This was the fundamental difference between the man she'd fled and the man she'd chosen. One had demanded her silence. The other cherished her voice. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, a wagon appeared on the road leading to their farm. Mary Vance waved enthusiastically from the driver's seat, having arrived earlier than expected for her visit. As Hank went to help his sister with her belongings, Theresa remained on the porch, one hand resting on her belly, the other on the railing of the home they'd built together. The journey from frightened, silenced wife to confident, outspoken woman had been long and at times painful, but standing here now, she wouldn't change a step of that path. It had led her exactly where she was meant to be, to a place where her voice was valued, her freedom protected, and her heart fully known and loved. As Hank returned with Mary, both laughing at some shared joke, Theresa joined them with a smile, adding her own voice to the conversation without hesitation or fear. This was freedom not just from Vernon's cruelty, but the freedom to be fully herself, to speak and laugh and love without constraint. And it had all begun with the courage to walk away, and the kindness of a cowboy who believed every woman deserved to speak freely.